On a warm summer night in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a 17-year-old girl went to a party and never came home. What started as teenage drama ended in bloodshed on a driveway, surrounded by people who refused to tell the truth. For 17 years, her family waited, wondering who among those teenagers was hiding a deadly secret. This is the story of Stacy Degrandchamp, and the jealousy, lies, and silence that allowed her killer to walk free for nearly 2 decades. In the summer of 2002, Fort Wayne, Indiana was like any other Midwestern city winding down after a long, hot day. Tree-lined streets, quiet neighborhoods, teenagers squeezing every last moment out of summer break. Among them was 17-year-old Stacy Degrandchamp, a bright, high school student with big plans and an even bigger personality. Friends called her Grandchamp, a nickname that matched her confidence and energy. She was outgoing, social, and never afraid to speak her mind. Teachers described her as capable and focused when she applied herself. Her family saw even more. They saw a young woman determined to build a future beyond high school hallways, raised by her single mother. Stacy grew up in a home built on resilience and love. The two shared a close bond. They talked about college, about independence, about building a life that would make the struggle worth it. Stacy dreamed of studying computer technology at Ball State University. She imagined herself working in a fast-changing digital world, creating something meaningful. But Stacy was also a typical American teenager. She loved hanging out with friends, going to the mall, talking about boys, and enjoying the freedom that comes just before senior year. That summer felt important. It was the final stretch before adulthood began to take shape. Earlier that year, she met Brandon Muff, a recent Fort Wayne graduate in his early 20s. Brandon had a reputation. He was known around town for his rebellious streak and his connection to the local party scene. He had charisma, the kind that drew people in, especially younger teens who were curious about the world just beyond high school. Stacy was drawn to him quickly. Their relationship moved fast, and through Brandon she entered a new social circle, one that revolved around house parties, late nights, loud music, and complicated friendships. That circle included Amanda Richards, Whitney McGee, and 16-year-old Holly Boyer. Many gatherings happened at Holly's house, where her father allowed teens to hang out around the pool with little supervision. Sometimes as many as 30 teenagers packed into the yard, laughing, drinking, and testing boundaries. At first it felt exciting, like stepping into a more grown-up world. But there was history between Stacy and Holly. Back in middle school they had clashed, tension that never truly disappeared. Years later at a pool party, Holly embarrassed Stacy in front of others, laughing and splashing her while others watched. Stacy left upset, but determined not to show weakness. When Stacy began dating Brandon, that old rivalry reignited. Because before Stacy, Holly had dated him. And even though that relationship had ended, emotions had not. Jealousy simmered quietly, turning into whispers, side glances, and rumors. Stacy refused to be intimidated. She carried herself with confidence. But she could feel the tension growing each time Holly was nearby. What once seemed like typical teenage drama was slowly becoming something darker, something more personal. As summer continued, cracks began forming in Stacy's relationship with Brandon. Drama followed him constantly, arguments, gossip, pressure from friends. Stacy started to realize that the excitement came with toxicity, with senior year approaching. She made a decision that showed her maturity. She broke up with Brandon. She wanted a clean slate, a fresh start, and distance from the chaos that surrounded him. She planned to step away from that entire friend group. With one exception, Abby Oswald, a newer friend she trusted. Abby seemed different, easygoing and supportive. Stacy believed she was walking away from drama. She had no idea that the past was not ready to let her go. On the evening of August 15, 2002, Stacy Degrandchamp was focused on normal teenage things. She spent the early part of the night at the mall with her friend Abby Oswald. The two laughed as they browsed through dresses, talking about senior year, prom, and everything that felt exciting about the future. For Stacy, it was supposed to be a fresh chapter. She had ended her relationship with Brandon and was trying to move forward. Later that night, Abby mentioned a small get-together at her house. On Guthrie Street, she told Stacy that Brandon and his roommate Justin were hanging out. It would not be a huge party, just a few people, nothing dramatic. Stacy hesitated. She knew Brandon's presence often meant tension, especially if Holly showed up. But after some reassurance, she agreed to go. Around 9:30 p.m., they arrived at the house. At first, everything seemed typical. Music playing, small groups talking, teenagers lingering on the porch and in the yard. But almost immediately, Stacy saw something that changed her mood. Brandon and Holly were sitting together outside. The sight hit her like a wave. All the history, the jealousy, the embarrassment. From the past, it rushed back at once. She walked toward them and asked Holly what she was doing there, her tone sharp and direct. The question was not casual. It carried months of unresolved resentment. Holly fired back. Voices rose quickly. Witnesses would later say the argument escalated in seconds. Insults were exchanged. Accusations about Brandon, about loyalty, about respect. Then, without warning, the two girls lunged at each other. They grabbed handfuls of hair, stumbled across the grass, throwing punches as partygoers stepped back in shock. Some shouted for them to stop. Others simply watched, unsure how serious it would become. For a moment, Stacy appeared to have the upper hand. She landed several blows, pushing Holly backward. It looked like a typical high school fight fueled by jealousy and pride, intense but temporary. Then something changed. In the middle of the struggle, Stacy's movement slowed. Witnesses described her as suddenly weak. Her grip loosened, her posture faltered. Confusion spread across the faces of those watching. It did not make sense. 1 second she was fighting. The next she seemed drained of strength. That was when Brandon stepped in. Instead of stopping the fight from the beginning, he now grabbed Stacy by the ankles and dragged her across the yard toward the trash cans. Some assumed he was trying to break things up. Others questioned why he had not intervened sooner. Stacy tried to stand. She staggered forward a few steps, then collapsed onto the driveway. At first, people thought she was simply exhausted or hurt from the fight. But then someone noticed the blood. It was spreading across her shirt, soaking the fabric, far more than anyone would expect from punches or scratches. Panic took over instantly. Brandon pulled out his phone and dialed 911. His voice urgent as he told the operator that a girl had been hurt. Neighbors who had earlier complained about noise now watched flashing emergency lights return to the house. Police, firefighters, and paramedics rushed to the scene. They found Stacy lying in the driveway. Bleeding heavily from her chest and abdomen, she was barely responsive. Paramedics worked quickly, applying pressure, stabilizing her as best they could before transporting her to a Fort Wayne trauma center. Officers secured the area, blocking off the yard and driveway. What began as a teenage argument had turned into a potential crime scene. As detectives surveyed the ground near the trash cans, they searched for broken glass or anything sharp that could explain the injuries, but nothing obvious stood out. The night air felt heavier now. The music had stopped. Conversations were replaced with whispers and fear. No one yet understood that this driveway would soon become the center of a homicide investigation that would haunt Fort Wayne for nearly 2 decades. At the hospital, doctors moved with urgency. Trauma teams worked to stabilize Stacy Degrandchamp as nurses called out vital signs and surgeons prepared for emergency intervention. She had suffered severe wounds to her upper chest and abdomen, injuries far beyond what anyone would expect from a fistfight between teenagers. Despite every effort, despite the controlled chaos of the trauma room and the determination of medical staff, the damage was too extensive. Stacy was pronounced dead later that night. She was 17 years old, just weeks away from starting her senior year. Back on Guthrie Street, detectives continued processing the scene under bright floodlights. Crime scene tape wrapped around the yard. Officers photographed every inch of grass, concrete, and porch railing. They searched carefully near the trash cans where Brandon had dragged Stacy, looking for broken glass, jagged metal, anything that could support the claim that she had fallen. But there was no broken glass, no sharp debris covered in blood, nothing that explained the clean, deep wounds doctors described. Inside the house, investigators located several kitchen knives sitting on a table. Each one was collected and bagged. Though none were immediately linked to the attack, still without a weapon found outside. Detectives could not rule anything out. The following day, the coroner's report confirmed what many already suspected. Stacy's injuries were not accidental cuts. They were precise stab wounds caused by a sharp blade. The pattern and depth of the wounds indicated force, not a fall. Detectives began formal interviews with those who had been at the party. Holly admitted to fighting Stacy but denied ever holding a knife. She insisted the confrontation was just a physical scuffle that got out of control. She repeated the theory that Stacy must have fallen onto something sharp near the trash cans. Brandon told a similar story. He said he tried to separate the girls, that he dragged Stacy away to stop the fight. He claimed he never saw a weapon. In Holly's hands, his shirt, however, was stained with Stacy's blood, something he explained as the result of trying to help her. Investigators noted inconsistencies. Witnesses described Brandon initially standing back while the fight unfolded. One account suggested that when someone attempted to break it up earlier, Brandon told them to let them fight. That detail raised eyebrows. Then there was the voicemail left days before the incident. Whitney McGee had called Stacy and said, "Be careful." When questioned, Whitney claimed she was warning Stacy that Holly was angry and possibly looking for a confrontation. She denied any knowledge of a weapon. Rumors spread quickly through Fort Wayne High School. Some students believed Stacy had been lured there intentionally. Others thought the fight had been planned to humiliate her. Jealousy over Brandon fueled speculation. Teenagers whispered in hallways and across lunch tables, each version of events slightly different. On August 19, 2002, friends and family gathered for Stacy's funeral. She was laid to rest wearing the prom dress she had been excited to use for her senior photos, a painful symbol of a future cut short. The church was filled with classmates, relatives, and even some who had been present that night. Brandon attended, drawing quiet stares and murmurs. Holly did not appear. For Stacy's family, the grief was overwhelming, but so was frustration. They knew what the medical report said. They knew. Her wounds were not an accident, yet without a recovered weapon and without witnesses willing to speak clearly, investigators faced a difficult path forward. As weeks turned into months, leads dried up, no knife was found, no one confessed, and the teenagers who had once packed that yard began to move on with their lives. But for Stacy's family, there was no moving on. There was only a growing fear that the truth about what happened on that driveway might never fully come to light. As 2002 turned into 2003 and 2003 turned into years beyond that, the investigation into Stacy Degrandchamp's death slowly lost momentum. Detectives followed every lead they could, but without a murder weapon and without a witness willing to directly name a killer, the case grew cold. For Stacy's family, time did not dull the pain. Every birthday was a reminder of the age she would never reach. Every graduation season brought back the image of the prom dress she was buried in. Her cousin Jaime McMillan refused to let the case fade into memory. She believed someone out there knew more than they had ever admitted. 17 years later, in March 2019, Jaime reached out to Fort Wayne police and asked them to reopen the investigation. Her message was simple: people grow up, loyalties change, guilt becomes heavier with age. Maybe someone was finally ready to talk. Detective Brian Martin took on the case with fresh eyes. He went back to the beginning, reviewing old reports, crime scene photographs, autopsy findings, and witness statements. He noticed how many stories sounded rehearsed, how often the same phrases appeared in interviews from 2002. He began re-interviewing key individuals. First, he met with Abby Oswald, who maintained that she never saw a knife that night. She said the fight happened fast and that she tried to separate the girls. She insisted she had no idea anyone would get seriously hurt. Next, Martin spoke with Brandon Muff, now older and visibly worn down by time. Brandon repeated that he never saw Holly holding a weapon, but his demeanor had changed. Detectives noted hesitation in his voice, pauses that were not present years earlier. Guilt seemed to linger beneath his words. Then Martin tracked down Holly Boyer, who was living quietly in Wisconsin. When she opened the door and saw a detective standing there asking about a night from nearly 2 decades earlier, her expression shifted immediately. During their conversation, Holly referred to Stacy as her friend. She described them as stupid, teenage girls who let emotions get out of control. She insisted she would never intentionally hurt Stacy, but Martin pressed her about whether she had been carrying anything that night. After several moments of silence, Holly admitted she had a folding knife with her on August 15, 2002. She claimed she carried it for protection, something she said was common for her at the time. When Detective Martin asked if she still had the knife, Holly hesitated, then walked into another room. Minutes later, she returned holding a folding knife in her hand. She said it was the same one. Martin carefully collected the knife as evidence and transported it back to Fort Wayne for testing. Initial lab results showed no trace of Stacy's DNA on the blade. Nearly 17 years had passed. Any biological evidence could have been lost, cleaned, or degraded, but Martin did not rely on DNA alone. He brought the knife to Dr. Wagner, the chief pathologist who had performed Stacy's autopsy. Together they compared the blade's dimensions to the measurements of the fatal wound documented in 2002, the width, the depth, the angle. Dr. Wagner concluded that the knife was consistent with the injuries. The size and shape matched the wound that ended Stacy's life. That finding shifted the case dramatically. Around the same time, Amanda Richards came forward with new information. She told detectives she had seen Holly holding a knife that night and moving toward the area where the fight occurred. With the knife recovered, witness statements evolving, and the medical analysis aligning, investigators believed they finally understood what happened. When Holly realized she was losing the fight, she pulled the knife and stabbed Stacy. On March 25, 2020, nearly 18 years after Stacy collapsed on that driveway, Holly Boyer was arrested and charged in connection with her death. The silence that once protected the truth was finally breaking, and for Stacy's family, justice no longer felt impossible. After Holly Boyer's arrest in March 2020, the case that had once seemed buried in the past was suddenly back in the spotlight. Local news stations across Indiana revisited the story. Headlines reminded the public of the 17-year-old girl who lost her life on a summer night in 2002. For Stacy Degrandchamp's family, it was emotional, exhausting, and long overdue. Prosecutors began laying out the timeline they believed jurors would eventually hear in court. The jealousy that lingered after Holly's breakup with Brandon, Stacy entering the same social circle, the tension that built throughout the summer, the phone call Brandon made pressuring Holly to attend the party, and the fight that erupted. Almost instantly when Stacy arrived, investigators believed that when the confrontation turned physical and Holly realized she was losing, she pulled out the folding knife she had been carrying and stabbed Stacy twice in the chest. The wounds were precise and forceful, consistent with the blade Holly later handed over to Detective Martin. As the case moved forward, the defense faced a difficult reality. The knife matched the wound pattern according to the pathologist. A witness had placed a knife in Holly's hand that night, and Holly herself had admitted to carrying it. The weight of the renewed investigation was significant. Rather than proceed to a full trial with the uncertainty that comes from witness testimony nearly 2 decades old, Holly accepted a plea agreement. She admitted to stabbing Stacy and took responsibility for her death. She confirmed in court that neither Brandon Muff nor Abby Oswald had physically participated in the stabbing. For some in the community, the plea deal sparked debate. There were those who believed a trial might have revealed even more details about what happened on that driveway. Others felt that after 19 years, the priority was accountability and finality. Inside the courtroom, emotions ran high. Stacy's family sat together, listening as the events of that night were summarized once again. But this time there was something different. This time the person responsible acknowledged her role. Jaime McMillan addressed the court, speaking directly about the years of pain their family endured. She talked about birthdays that came and went, about holidays with an empty chair at the table, about the dreams Stacy once shared of college and a future in technology. She said that no sentence could bring Stacy back, but hearing Holly accept responsibility mattered. For nearly 2 decades there had been whispers and suspicion. Now there was an official admission. On January 14, 2022, under the terms of the plea agreement, Holly Boyer was sentenced to 25 years in prison with 5 years suspended and 3 years of adult probation. With credit for time already served and good behavior, she could become eligible for release as early as 2030. The sentence did not erase the loss. It did not restore the years taken from Stacy or the time her family spent waiting for answers, but it marked a turning point. For the first time since 2002, there was legal recognition of what happened. Stacy did not die from an accident. She was stabbed during a fight fueled by jealousy and pride. Justice had taken nearly 2 decades, but It had finally arrived. The case of Stacy Degrandchamp is more than a story about a teenage fight that went too far. It is a reminder of how quickly emotion can turn into tragedy, how jealousy, pride, and rivalry can escalate in seconds, leaving consequences that last for decades. On August 15, 2002, what began as a tense argument between two young women became irreversible. A folding knife introduced into a fistfight changed everything. In a matter of moments, a 17-year-old girl with dreams of college, prom, and a future in technology was lying on a driveway fighting for her life. For years, silence protected the truth. Witnesses were young, scared, and loyal to friendships that felt bigger than consequences. Stories were softened, details were omitted, and investigators were left without the cooperation they needed. Without a weapon, without a confession, the case slowly drifted into the background of Fort Wayne's history. But time has a way of shifting perspective. 17 years later, one determined family member refused to let Stacy's name fade. Jamie McMillan's decision to push for answers reopened doors that many believed were permanently closed. Detective Brian Martin's persistence proved that cold cases are not forgotten. Cases. Sometimes they are simply waiting for the right moment, the right pressure, the right crack in someone's conscience. When Holly Boyer finally admitted she carried the knife, and when medical analysis confirmed it matched the fatal wound, the B narrative changed from rumor to record, from suspicion to accountability. Stacy's story resonates across the United States because it reflects something deeply human: the volatility of youth, the intensity of teenage relationships, and the danger of letting anger take control. It also highlights the importance of speaking up, of telling the truth even when it is uncomfortable. For Stacy's family, justice did not mean celebration. It meant acknowledgement. It meant hearing in a courtroom what they had known in their hearts for years: that her death was not an accident, that she did not simply fall, that her life was taken. Today, Stacy is remembered not just as a victim in a case file, but as a daughter, a cousin, a friend, a young woman who had goals and ambition. Her nickname, Grandchamp, still echoes in the memories of those who loved her. Her story stands as a warning and a lesson. Conflicts that seem small can spiral. Choices made in anger can echo for a lifetime. And silence can delay justice, but it cannot erase the truth forever. If this case moved you and you believe stories like Stacy's deserve to be remembered, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Here on Real Crime Pulse, we bring you real cases, real victims, and the full truth behind the headlines. Because every voice matters and every story deserves to be told. This is Real Crime Pulse, and we will see you in the next case.